The Peacock cost 35 cents at the Comanche County dispersal sale on a Thursday afternoon in October of 1934. And the reason he cost 35 cents was that he was half bald, missing most of his train, and screaming loud enough to clear the aisle around his crate every time a stranger came within 10 feet of it. Odessa Ferris had come to the Whitlock dispersal for a cream separator and a decent milk cow if the price was fair, and she had gotten the separator and passed on the cow because the price was not fair, and she had learned 2 years ago not to pay unfair prices out of impatience. She was walking the separator back toward her wagon when the auctioneer's assistant came down the row with what he called the miscellaneous lot, a wire crate nobody had bid on twice already, and inside it a peacock in the middle of a molt so severe that half his back was bare skin and pin feathers, his famous train reduced to a scatter of broken quills, and his voice, when he screamed at the crowd, carrying the specific outraged fury of a creature who understood exactly how far he had fallen and blamed every person present for it. 10 cents, the assistant said, and I'll throw in the crate. Nobody moved. Odessa moved. She had $31 in the household account, which was more than she had carried in 2 years, the residue of a good wheat check in July that she had been rationing out with the specific discipline of a woman who understood that a good year did not mean the next year would be good. 35 cents was not going to threaten that discipline. She paid it, more out of the fact that nobody else would than out of any plan, and loaded the screaming crate into the wagon bed, and drove the 11 miles home to the 80 acres outside Walter's that had been her grandfather's and then her father's, and was now, since March of the previous year, hers alone. Before we find out what Odessa does with this half-bald, screaming bird nobody else wanted, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This channel reaches people from all across the country, and we love knowing where our stories land. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. We have new stories every week. She had not planned on a peacock. She had not planned, as far as she had planned anything since her father died, on the wheat and the 11 laying hens and the 2 milk cows that were the entire visible economy of the Ferris place, and on stretching whatever the wheat check gave her across the distance to the next one. Comanche County in October of 1934 was not a place that rewarded impulse purchases, not after 4 years of drought stacked on top of the collapsed grain prices, not with the topsoil going up in brown clouds every few weeks that spring and settling in drifts against the fence lines like dirty snow. She understood the arithmetic of her situation with the specific clarity of a woman who kept her own books. $31 minus 35 cents, minus what the wheat would need for seed in the spring, minus what the roof was going to need before winter, equaled a number she did not like looking at directly. But she had not bought the bird for arithmetic. She had bought him because she had spent 4 years reading everything the county library carried on livestock, poultry, and anything else that might turn a marginal 80 acres into something more than marginal. And in a magazine that had come to the house addressed to her mother 2 years before her mother died, she had read an article about the fashion trade's hunger for ornamental plumage, an East Coast market recovering faster than the agricultural one, milliners and costumers paying premium prices for peacock feathers with the full eye intact, the kind of feather a molting bird dropped naturally every year without being killed for it. She had filed the article away in the part of her mind where she kept things that might matter later. 35 cents and a screaming half-bald bird in a wire crate was later. She put him in the empty end of the henhouse, walled off with chicken wire she had left over from a repair job, and she fed him the same scratch grain the hens got, supplemented with the greens and insects he would forage if she let him range once he settled, and she left him alone. Peacocks did not want handling during a hard molt, and this was a hard molt, harder than the ordinary annual shed she had read about, the kind of feather loss that came from stress, poor diet, and neglect stacked over what she guessed was more than one season. She checked on him twice a day, filled his water, and did not try to touch him. And for the first week, he screamed at her anyway, out of what she understood was pure habit rather than any specific objection to her presence. Daniel Coswell came to the shared fence line on the second Tuesday after she brought the bird home. He farmed the 160 acres to the north, wheat and a small herd of white-faced cattle he was managing down rather than up as the drought held on, and he had been at that fence with some version of a reason since roughly the previous spring, a reason Odessa had noticed and had not examined because examining it required time she did not have and an answer she was not certain she wanted yet. The pretext this time was the corner post at the northeast boundary, which had genuinely worked loose over the summer and did genuinely need resetting, a fact she confirmed for herself before he arrived, so that when he offered to reset it, she could tell him truthfully that she had already ordered new cedar posts from the co-op and would handle it herself in November. He heard this, nodded, and did not argue, and then he heard the peacock scream from the hen house, and his eyebrows went up in a way that made his whole face look 10 years younger. "That a peacock?" he said. "He is. What happened to him?" "Bad molt, bad owner before that, I'd guess, from the state of him." She looked toward the hen house. "He'll come back." Daniel looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a man revising an assessment, the expression she had been watching him make with some regularity since the previous spring, always about something small, always arriving at the same conclusion. "I expect he will," he said, and went back to his side of the fence, and did not offer an opinion on the wisdom of the purchase, which she noted and appreciated more than she said. The molt finished by the end of November. What came in beneath it surprised her more than she had let herself expect. The new plumage was not merely adequate, it was, by every comparison she could make against the illustrations in her father's old encyclopedia and the 2 photographs in the fashion magazine she had kept, exceptional. The blue of the neck and breast, deep and almost black shot in certain light, iridescent in a way that shifted through violet and bronze and green, depending on the angle of the sun. And when the train began to grow back in December, it came in longer and more heavily eyed than the illustration suggested was typical, each feather carrying the distinctive eye pattern in saturated color with none of the fading or thinness she had read could mark a poorly bred or poorly fed bird. She named him Solomon, for reasons she did not fully explain even to herself, and by January he had stopped screaming at her specifically, though he screamed at nearly everything else with undiminished enthusiasm. She began reading everything she could find on peafowl husbandry with the same discipline she had applied to the wheat rotation. Peafowl reached full plumage maturity around 3 years of age, and Solomon, she judged from his overall development and the condition of his legs and spurs, was coming up on his 3rd spring, which meant this next molt, the one due in late spring after the brief winter display season, was going to be his first fully mature train. The husbandry itself was not complicated in the way cattle or dairy goats were complicated. Peafowl needed roosting height, protection from ground predators at night, a varied diet heavier in protein than laying hens required, and space to range and forage, all of which the Ferris place could provide without significant new investment. What the birds needed beyond that was patience, because a single male produced 1 molt a year, dropping his train feathers naturally between late June and August after the spring display season ended, and the feathers had to be collected as they fell rather than plucked, since a plucked feather lacked the quill integrity buyers in the ornamental trade were willing to pay for. She wrote to the address in the fashion magazine article, a supply house in New York that served milliners, theatrical costumers, and department store display departments, and she asked what they paid for peacock train feathers with the full eye intact, sold by the piece rather than the pound. The answer came back in 3 weeks. Prices ran from 15 cents for a shorter, lesser feather to as much as $1 for a prime specimen over 4 feet with a large, well-formed eye and undamaged barbs, sold individually to milliners or in bulk lots to costume houses at a lower per-feather rate. A single mature peacock in good condition dropped somewhere between 150 and 200 train feathers in a season. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter and did the arithmetic twice before she trusted it. We're halfway through this story, and we want to know, have you ever raised an unusual bird or seen a peacock's train up close? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your reminder. New stories every week. The county had opinions about the peacock well before he had feathers worth anything, because the county in Comanche County in 1934 did not require evidence before forming an opinion, only the appearance of something unusual, and a screaming half-bald bird in a woman's chicken yard qualified. Orville Dietz at the feed store told her twice, on 2 separate visits, that a peacock was a rich man's yard bird, decorative and useless, and that she would be better off with 3 more laying hens for the same feed cost. She thanked him both times with the specific courtesy she reserved for advice she had no intention of following. Mrs. Talmadge at the church circle mentioned to several women that Odessa Ferris had gone a little strange since her father passed, buying broken-down showbirds at auction instead of stock that earned its keep, and that it was a shame because Odessa had always seemed like such a sensible girl. Odessa heard about this the way one heard about everything in a county that size, secondhand and 3 days late, and did not correct the record because correcting it would have required explaining a fashion trade in New York City to a woman who had never in her life left Comanche County, and Odessa did not have that kind of afternoon to spare. Daniel Coswell's opinion arrived differently, in installments, over the winter. He came to the fence more often than the corner post required, a fact both of them understood and neither of them discussed, and he asked after the bird with the specific interest of a man who was actually curious rather than making conversation. By February, when Solomon's winter courtship display had come in full, and he was fanning his half-grown train at the hens in a performance that struck Odessa as equal parts magnificent and faintly absurd, Daniel stood at the fence and watched for a full 10 minutes without saying anything, which for him was its own kind of statement. Orville Dietz says he's a useless bird, Odessa said. Orville Dietz has never once been right about anything in the 11 years I've known him, Daniel said, so I wouldn't start trusting him now. He watched Solomon fan again. What are you going to do with him when the feathers come in proper? Seldom, not him. Him I'm keeping. She had decided this early and had not revisited it, the way she had learned to decide things once and hold them, because a farm did not run on decisions that got remade every week. The feathers come back every year without killing the bird for them. That's the whole point of him. A dead peacock's worth 1 set of feathers and nothing after. A live one that molts properly is worth a set every summer for as long as he lives, which the encyclopedia says can run 15, 20 years if he's kept well. Daniel was quiet for a moment in the way she had learned meant he was turning something over rather than failing to have an opinion. That's a longer game than most people around here are playing. Most people around here are trying to get through the next wheat check, she said. I'm trying to get through the next 10 years. He looked at her the way he had looked at her the day the corner post came up, the expression that was less about the fence and more about her, and he did not say anything further about it and went back to his side of the property and came back the following Tuesday with a question about whether she had considered predator-proofing the roost, which she had, but she let him walk the fence line with her anyway and check the wire, because his attention to the practical details of her operation had become, over the winter, a thing she looked forward to without having decided to. The spring display season ran from March through May, Solomon fanning at the 2 hens she had acquired from a breeder near Lawton in April, specifically so his display had a purpose beyond aesthetics. And by the 3rd week of June, the first train feathers began to drop, the way the county extension pamphlet on ornamental poultry had described, gradually at first and then in a concentrated period of about 6 weeks as the hormonal cycle that drove the display collapsed and the feathers released from their follicles. Odessa collected them each morning on a walk around the run, the same discipline she brought to gathering eggs, sorting them by length and condition into the shallow wooden trays she had built over the winter for exactly this purpose. The prime feathers, 4 feet and over, with a full, undamaged eye, went into one tray. The shorter or slightly damaged feathers, still salable to the costume trade at a lower rate, went into a second. By the end of July, she had counted, cleaned, and packed 178 feathers, the majority prime. She shipped the first lot to the New York supply house in early August, insured, in a long, custom crate Daniel had helped her build from scrap lumber over 2 Saturdays, packed with tissue paper she had bought specifically for the purpose after determining that newspaper ink would stain the barbs. The payment came back 3 weeks later, $41.20 for 178 feathers, more than she had cleared on the entire wheat crop the previous year, and the supply house letter included a note asking whether she had additional stock or knew of other regional suppliers, since demand for prime, undamaged plumage had outpaced what their existing sources could provide. She was standing at the mailbox with the check in her hand when Daniel came down the road in his truck, slowing when he saw her expression, which she understood afterward must have been considerable, because he stopped the truck entirely and got out. "What is it?" he said. She held out the letter without a word. He read it. He read it a second time, the way he read things he intended to remember correctly. He looked at the check, at the number on it, at Odessa standing at the mailbox in the August heat with the wheat stubble gold behind her, and Solomon visible in the distance, strutting the yard with the specific, unbothered confidence of a bird who had already dropped what he needed to drop and considered the matter closed. $41, Daniel said, for feathers off a bird that cost you 35 cents. That was one bird's first proper season, she said. The encyclopedia says a mature male can improve his display for several years yet, and I've got 2 hens now that'll be laying pea-chicks of their own by next spring, if the breeding goes the way it should. In 5 years, if I build the flock right, I could have 6 or 8 mature males dropping trains every summer. That's better money than the wheat, he said. It was not a question. It's better money than the wheat, she agreed, and it doesn't ask anything of the topsoil. Doesn't need rain the wheat needs. Doesn't fail because the wind took the crop 3 years running. She looked at him. I've been thinking about the East 40 since March. The East 40 was the parcel that had belonged to the Hollis place before the bank took it back in '32. 40 acres bordering both the Ferris land and Daniels, standing empty and unclaimed because nobody in the county had $30 of confidence to spare on land in a 4th year of drought. What about it? Daniel said, though his face suggested he had already done some of the arithmetic himself. Room to range a bigger flock without crowding the hens or the cattle. Good tree cover along the creek for roosting. I could have it for what the bank's asking if I had the money in hand by the time the note came due. And after this shipment and what the wheat brings in September, I believe I will. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Leave a comment below. What's the most unlikely thing you've ever seen turn into something valuable? Your stories are what makes this community what it is. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll have a new story for you next week. Daniel drove out to the East 40 with her the following Saturday, walking the boundary with the specific attention of a man assessing a piece of ground on its actual merits rather than its reputation, and pronounced the creek frontage sound and the tree cover better than his own lands, which she took as the professional compliment it was intended to be. He came back the Saturday after that with a soil auger he had borrowed from the extension office, and the Saturday after that with nothing borrowed at all, just himself and the specific quality of showing up that had stopped requiring a fence post or a corner stake as its excuse sometime around July, though neither of them had said so out loud. By September, she had made the offer on the East 40 and the bank had taken it. The wheat check and the feather money together covering the note with $11 left over, which she put towards cedar for a second roosting structure. She had 4 hens now instead of 2, purchased from the Lawton breeder with part of the feather income, and Solomon's second season of courtship display, come the following spring, would be performed for an audience 4 times the size of his first, which meant, if the breeding held the way the pamphlets in her own careful records suggested it should, a considerably larger flock by the time the molt came due again. Daniel came to supper on a Tuesday in October, a year almost to the week since she had carried a screaming, half-bald bird home in the bed of her wagon for 35 cents because nobody else would have him. He had brought a jar of his mother's preserves, which he set on the table with the specific formality of a man aware that the gesture meant more than the preserves themselves. And Odessa had made the cornbread her mother used to make, and they sat at the table with the October evening going amber outside the window, and Solomon's evening call carrying faintly across the yard, the sound she had once found irritating and now found, without quite admitting it, to be one of the sounds she would miss if it ever stopped. Orville Dietz asked me last week if I'd heard what you'd done with that peacock, Daniel said. What did you tell him? I told him you'd turned 35 cents into 80 acres and a New York supply contract, and that he might want to reconsider his opinions on useless birds. He looked at her across the table. He didn't have much to say after that. He wouldn't. She poured the coffee. Orville's never once been right, you said. 11 years running. Daniel turned his cup on the table. The small, deliberate motion she had learned meant he was arriving at something. I've been thinking about the fence between the East 40 and my north section. What about it? It doesn't need to be there, he said. Not the way it's set now. If a person were combining the operations, it'd make more sense run different, or not run at all in some places. She looked at him across the table, at the dark hair going sun-bleached at the crown from a summer of fieldwork, at the steady brown eyes that had been arriving at conclusions about her with increasing regularity since the previous spring, at the man who had reset a corner post that didn't need him to, and had kept coming back long after it stopped needing an excuse at all. "That's a significant observation," she said, "for a man discussing fence placement." "I've been thinking about a lot of things since October," he said. "The fence is the practical version of most of them." Outside, Solomon called again into the deepening evening, and one of the young hens answered him from the roost, and the sound carried across 80 acres that had become 120, built from 35 cents and a bird nobody else would bid on twice. "Come back Saturday," she said, "with whatever you've got on paper about that fence." "Saturday," he said, and the corner of his mouth did something it had not quite done before. And outside the window, the last of the light went the particular gold that October evenings in Comanche County went when they had decided, after a long, hard season, to be generous.